The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight we look at some of the most pressing issues facing child welfare in Ontario. Then Nam Kiwanuka talks to author Dawn Kingston about what being pregnant does to your brain. That's all ahead on The Agenda. Is Ontario's child welfare system in trouble? Well, agencies across the province are reporting a funding and staffing crisis. The Ombudsman is investigating the use of hotels and office spaces to house children. What can be done to fix these problems? Let's ask. Solomon Owu, Interim CEO of Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. Erwin Elman, President of Defence for Children International, Canada and Ontario's child advocate from 2008 to 2019. Kiris Garabagi, Dean of Faculty of Community Services and Professor in the School of Child and Youth Care at Toronto Metropolitan University, and Irene Tomatuk, Executive Director of Paikin, James and Hudson Bay Family Services. And we are really grateful to convene all of you four around our table today because you have a vast array of experiences in the area in which we are going to discuss. And let's start off with some facts and figures to help set up our conversation. Sheldon, if you would, bring this graphic up. Here are some child welfare facts in this province for fiscal year 2022 and 23. There are 50 designated children's aid societies. 3 are religious, 13 Indigenous. That's 7,200 full-time staff working in this sector. 117,500 referrals made. 61,000 child protection investigations. And 8,600 children and youth are in care in this province. This is a very busy sector. Solomon, you represent children's aid societies in Ontario. What are the most pressing? Okay, let's just do one. What is the most pressing issue on your plate these days?
Thank you, Steve, for the question. And at Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies, we represent 47 of the 50 mandated child welfare organizations that you talked about. Child welfare is one of the subset of organizations that support the broader children's services system across the province. And the work we do has to be integrated and it has to look at the total well-being of children across the province. And if you ask me what is the number one pressing need, the number one pressing need is not just a child welfare issue, but a broader children's services system issue where we are looking at children and youth in this province not getting some of the supports, the treatments, and the services they need to thrive and to do well in their communities when they need it.
And because they're not getting those services, what are the consequences?
So the consequences are some of the things, Steve, you would have seen in the recent media stories where parents literally are showing up at the doors of CASs and saying, I am surrendering my child because I've done everything within my community. I've gone to various places that I believe I should be getting help. They are not getting help. So kids are not getting the help they need. And parents sometimes believe child welfare will be able to help navigate some of those systems, but we are equally going through the same challenges that parents are going through. And the other piece you'll say is that now we have children within child welfare spaces that are simply not getting the treatment they need. So we are able to offer them what I call housing, a shelter, and accommodation, feeding. But that is not enough. Okay. As a province, we should be doing better than that.
Let's continue the story here. Irene, your focus is more in the remote and northern areas. What are you seeing up there?
Well, we serve a population of about 10,000 community members within 7 communities. But I want to tell you that, our communities have survived 350 years of colonialism. And I believe that it speaks volumes about First Nation communities everywhere. And I think the Ontario child welfare system can really learn from our communities, our kinship practices of taking care of our children, taking care of our own. Because right now, we're experiencing many of the challenges that Solomon talks about. We're having to send children south to access services because those services are not available in our communities.
Do you have enough people up north to deal with these issues?
No, we don't. We don't have access to doctors, dentists, optometrists. We don't have, we have very limited opportunities with autism support, complex special needs. We have to send our children south. And I can tell you that I left my community of 2,500 people.
Which is where?
In Moose Factory, to come to Toronto, where we have millions of people. And that's hard for me to do as an adult. And we're doing this with children. We're taking them from environments where they feel safe into environments of unknown, where they don't know anyone or this way of life.
There are going to be people watching us and listening to us right now who don't know where Moose Factory is. So maybe you should just tell them how challenging it is to get from way up there to way down here. How do you get here?
So we service 7 communities, and none of our communities are connected by road. They're all fly-in communities. So when I left home on Monday, I took a boat over to the mainland, and I took a flight from Moosonee to Timmins. I stayed there overnight, and then I flew here yesterday. So I've traveled about 1,000 kilometers to be here today.
It's a big province, and we're grateful you made it.
Thank you.
Kiris, okay, it's probably 8 years ago we did an episode on this program looking at the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous youth in the child welfare system. That's 8 years ago. Anything different today?
Well, there have been lots of attempts at making things different. There is no question, and one can credit the hard work of people in children's aid societies and other sectors who've really tried. But if you ask me, is anything really different? No, it's not really different. We've tinkered with systems. We've made adjustments here and there. There continues to be a massive overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous young people in child welfare and in any of our contained and sort of carceral or jail-like systems, with very little prospect of that changing anytime soon.
There are no doubt myriad reasons for that. Do you want to just lay a few on us?
Absolutely. I mean, look, racism is at the root of it all. There is no question that anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism are still very much prevalent in all of our, as Irene pointed out, colonial institutions, and that applies to child welfare as well. It also applies to the university sector and other sectors, to be perfectly fair. But it goes beyond that. It also goes to the lack of strengthening of community, where communities that could serve their own children effectively and well, but that have very little support in that. It goes to the instability of government funding and support to those communities, that one day it's huge and there's a great press release and then the next day it's gone again. It goes to a lack of commitment to really think differently about how to keep young people well. And I just want to say, because we're going to talk about child welfare and child protection as if these were the same things. Yep. We have a child protection system in Ontario. We do not and never had a child welfare system in Ontario.
Yep.
Absolutely.
A child welfare system, as the name would suggest, is a system that aims to keep children well, healthy, to keep families and communities well and healthy. A child protection system is a system based on a mandated allowance to enforce rules, to enforce standards that are usually value-based on children and families to keep them away from harm. It's a risk and liability-based system, child protection, and that has very little to do with child welfare in the sense of trying to keep children well.
So we need more of the former and less of the latter.
We need to, in the immediate sense, we need to improve the latter. So we need to have child protection that actually protects children, and that means supporting children's aid societies.
But the goal's got to be welfare.
Job. But the goal has to be supporting young people, their families, and communities.
Okay, Erwin, let me get a comment from you out of this. And you've been on this program many times in the past as the former child advocate in the province of Ontario, so you know this stuff well. Mm-hmm. The ombudsman for the province is apparently investigating the use of hotels and Airbnbs, even office spaces, to house kids in right now. Is this a new phenomenon in the province?
Absolutely. So hotels and Airbnbs are new, but hotels I had heard of, usually teenagers, and few. And when we raised it, there was some rules about when to use hotels that the ministry put in place. Of course, I don't know if they were used, but what's new now, really new, and people should understand, this is not teenagers. And Solomon can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen the data. not just your data, and the data that you gave to the Toronto Star didn't include the ages. There are children as young as 3 years old. There's an 11-year-old in an office for 12 months who's autistic, with social workers that, and I feel for you, and I know you've been living with this for decades. So this is new. It's come home to the rest of the province. Social workers who are not trained to be child and youth care workers, working overnight shifts to just manage this child living in an office, 11-year-old autistic. We take children, Solomon, we take children from their home. Chris is right, it's a child protection system. We say to them, you are in danger. That's your job. That's your job. You are in danger, child. Timmy, John, Madeline, we have to take you for your own well-being and safety. We promise to care for you, to love you, and support you. And then you put them in an office for 11 months. And the idea is supposed to return them home and help them deal with whatever they're dealing with in that quote-unquote placement you've created. And you have social workers who are not trained to support the youth to learn how, the child, to learn how to self-regulate. And we expect something to happen, some miracle, so they can go home. And then we've got the mom at home with her other kids with no nothing.
So we are not fulfilling our commitment to these children.
And I'm pointing at Solomon and looking at him, but I'm telling you this, and I hope you let me say this. It's a context that Solomon and Irene are working in. And the context is a perfect storm. We've undermined child protection by trying to force it to be a child welfare system, and I wish the people in child protection would stop saying child welfare, because it isn't. It's built to be a system 130 years ago to surveil parents. Whether it's good or bad, that's it. That's the system. Do your job.
Okay.
And wait, but we've also hollowed out every other support to families in this province, everything. And our province, our government, and it created a perfect storm that's battering our children and families. 136 deaths in 2022-23 connected to child protection system. 136, that's a record for Ontario. And you and I have been around a long time, a record every 3 days. And it's not acceptable. It's not.
Solomon
not
wants a word here.
Yeah. No, so, Steve, one of the things that never makes it to the news or the news media is that 97% of investigations that child welfare gets involved with, children stay at home. So it is not that child welfare brings kids into the child welfare system. In 97% of our investigations, children stay with families. And families is always the first place CSs want to go to try and find support for children.
Yeah.
You will be looking at things like uncles, aunties, grannies, so all the supports within the communities. Over the years, one of the greatest support structure that we've had within child welfare is a foster caregiver system, where we've had parents that have showed up and said, listen, I'm putting my hand up. I want to take another child into my family.
But we don't have enough foster parents anymore.
Yes, just in the last 3-4 years, foster caregivers have dropped by 30%. It speaks to some of the economic challenges and how that is affecting families and their willingness to take in some of the children we are talking about.
Is that because the province doesn't give these foster parents enough money to help support the kids? Is that one reason we don't have enough?
There are a number of reasons. One of them, obviously, Steve, includes some of the legislative requirements. So foster caregivers are feeling like there's too much of a burden in doing this work from a legislative space. And then the other piece you're looking at, because of some of the complexities of care that we are seeing in the child welfare spaces. So when they talk about kids presenting with autism, sometimes the long wait list that they are on to be able to get supports on the other side becomes a challenge. Some of the mental health supports, and it's not that these community service providers are not interested or willing to, it's just the same capacity issue we are talking about.
Curious.
And that is a challenge we're dealing with.
I just want to jump in because something you said triggered me. This is exactly the same conversation we had 10 years ago. You know, it is very common for the child welfare sector or the child protection sector to say, look, 97% of the work we do actually is really positive and so on, and nobody wants to talk about that. And I'll tell you why nobody wants to talk about that. Because it's an expectation.
Yes.
You exist for things to go well. And so we're not going to talk about things that we expect to happen. We're going to talk about the things that we don't expect to happen, which is why it doesn't matter that 97% of the work goes well. That's just what we expect. The other piece I want to pick up on, which is a very important development in child protection in Ontario, you know, that lack of foster parent capacity and so on, that is true, and that is really a significant issue, is resulting in a very, very rapid move toward privatization in care. So we have a rise of private for-profit foster care. That is one of the fastest growing systems. And especially in the context of kids with complex needs, the care for those kids is being constituted through private for-profit actors. And this is a disaster. We have done this multiple times. That's how we created group homes for profit, and we know how that ended up. And now we're doing it again in the context of complex care. In fact, the children you're sending south
Outside
are
paid
making
resources.
money
Yeah.
for, you have a price tag. You know,
They do.
I hate to say it, but they have a price tag on their back.
Can I find out from you, Irene? We've talked about Airbnbs and hotels and office spaces. I presume that's not an option in Moosonee, right?
It's not an option, but I can tell you that we were using an OPR right here in...
What's an OPR?
It's an outside paid resource.
Okay.
It's privatization. We were using one right here in Brampton. However, they're going through the licensing process, but they haven't completed that process. So they're very limited as to how many children they can have in their care. So they can have a maximum of 2. While they're going through the licensing process, we had 3. So yesterday we didn't have any children in hotels or Airbnbs. Today we do. So we have 1 child in a hotel today, and he will be staffed by one of our staff,
How old is he?
15.
Is he okay?
Yep, he's doing well. However, that's really not where we want him to be.
No, that's
we
not
want
optimal.
him to be in a home.
Although, can I just say, you know, it's important that we don't get stuck on the negative connotation of being in a hotel or an Airbnb. The reality is you got to ask yourself, is it better to send a child thousands of kilometers to a different community where they can be in a licensed place of whatever type, the quality of which we know nothing about, or is it better to stay in community even if that means you live in a hotel which ideally has a little swimming pool
You'd
and
say
some
the
other
latter.
things?
You think the latter's
And I
better?
would say, well, at the very least, I would say we have to think that through a little bit before we start, you know, sort of really committing to the idea that Airbnbs and hotels are the wrong way to go.
Let me get this on the record if I can right now, because the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services is the ministry that, Irwin's already shaking his head. But, you know, here's their position, and let's get it on the record. Sheldon, if you would, bring the graphic up. Our government is redesigning the child welfare system to focus on high quality and culturally appropriate services that prioritize safety, protection, and the needs and circumstances of children, youth, and families. We welcome the Ombudsman's review and recommendations to augment the work already underway within government. Over the past 10 years, the average number of children and youth in care has decreased by about 29%.
That's true.
And the average number of ongoing open protection cases has decreased by about 49%. This year, we increased funding for child protection services by another $14 million, in addition to last year's increase of $76.3 million. Irwin, this is a government certainly claiming that the numbers indicate we're going in the right direction. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm listening to Solomon, who's saying absolutely we're not, but I'll say this. 136 deaths is the record for Ontario. It's about 20% higher than the previous record. Thank you, system redesign. Even though there are less kids in care, the number of serious injury and bodily harm reports that lands on that minister's desk has stayed the same or gone up with less kids in care.
What does that tell you?
That tells me that the system is in crisis, that the system is in crisis, and his redesign, which has meant that workers, because it's a child protection system, workers were told it's important to leave those children at home. And workers, and it's so important to understand the context of your workers, Solomon. Workers are caught in this Hobson's choice. We leave kids at home. This is what happened to Navia, if we talk about her.
Navia, we should just say, is that 4-year-old girl in Toronto who died an appalling death.
Yes.
Appalling.
And found in a dumpster.
Found in a dumpster.
Community dead. And what happened to her was that judges left her at home because, yes, that's where the minister wants to go. By the way, it saves money to the minister. That's where the minister wants to go. And more children are dying in families at home. But I don't think just dying. We have those children, and we didn't talk about them, the parents of complex care kids coming to your agencies, and I'm not speaking for you in Paikin, because I think you've experienced before, but Solomon, across the province, coming to you and saying, help us. We cannot take it anymore because there is no support in the darn province for our kids, whether the autism, fetal alcohol syndrome, the kids in struggling with mental health issues in Windsor, and they're coming to you and saying, we need your help. And you can't because you're
Let me
a
get
child
Solomon to react to this.
protection system.
One death of a child every 3 days is outrageous. How do you react to that?
So, Steve, the death of one child, even if it's for the entirety of a year or multiple years, is a tragedy. And child welfare, over the years, what we've tried to work with is to build support within communities to make sure children thrive with their families. So the story that you read generated a conclusion. What the story didn't tell you is if a child welfare agency gets a call right now to show up at a hospital because a child presented with a situation that requires child welfare's involvement, without that child potentially being discharged and unfortunately passing away, that is one of the things we would have to report as a child welfare involved death.
Yes.
So I think it just speaks to the kind of reporting requirements that do not really take us to the causation. Why is CSS getting involved in spaces where it shouldn't be? There are even no protection concerns when it comes to some of these things. So it is health that is required, and some of the conversations that we've been having are beyond the boundaries of CSS.
No.
So one of the things you would have seen is the Ombudsman's investigation. It is focused on child welfare. But then the question is, why is a child who is waiting for 9 months or 10 months to get into treatment stuck on the child welfare side? Why is Ministry of Health not part of that investigation? And that was one of the calls we've made to the Ombudsman, that if we want to have a conversation, not just about child protection, like you said, but the total well-being of a child, let's look at it from the end-to-end spectrum.
Erwin.
What I want and what drives it is so difficult. I do not ever want to hear one death is too many again, or...
It is.
It is, but we're not talking about one death. We're talking 136 deaths, 2,000 serious injury and bodily harm. And you know what we're not talking about? The kids. And that's what really drives me crazy about systems when we talk about change. It's why systems and ministries can't change themselves. We need something bigger. Is because we need to focus on the children and the needs of the family. And let's talk about, I'm not talking about your system, Solomon. I'm talking about the child, Nevia, who died and what she didn't get. And she was in care for 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's not that she wasn't in care.
And 3 different agencies.
Yes.
So
Come on.
And
Let's have an honest
I just want
conversation.
to
I'm
stand
not
by.
blaming you, but let's talk about children.
And
Solomon,
this is a
come back on that.
conversation we are having. It's a conversation about children, because what you need to understand is
As if I
we
don't.
we can only have conversations. At this point, some of these deaths are under the investigation of police, so we can get into so much details. But what is actually challenging is having conversations about children, and you're getting a ministry statement saying we've put money in there.
Exactly.
That is really not what we are talking about. We are talking about the needs for children. Why are children in this province not getting the supports they need? Why can't we have system or community investment? So Irene doesn't have to take a child 3 or 4 days
Now
away
you're
to
talking.
find the supports in those communities. The lack of community investment. So child welfare has actually gotten to a place where literally we are holding the bag for the lack of system investment in other sectors.
Irene, I haven't heard you in a bit. Let's hear from you. Yes.
So I wanted to talk about that funding piece. You know, they have fit us all into one box in Ontario. And I don't know any other agency that has to charter a plane 3 times a week. It's $17,000 per charter. So we're looking at paying a salary 52 weeks out of the year. And we have to find that in our budget. So, you know, we know agencies in the South that have the same budget that we do, but they're not looking at the cost of living in the North. I can tell you we get about $1.3 million a month from the ministry. But I'm also going to tell you we spend about $4 million a month to keep our doors open, to make sure we have adequate supports for children and their families, to pay our employees, to keep our lights on. And it's our responsibility to find that money somewhere else.
So you would like some recognition from Queen's Park that things are far more expensive doing things north of the French River, and they ought to recognize that.
And they do need to recognize that, because when we look at, and I'm sorry I'm going to use this as an example, if you're going to buy a case of beer in downtown Toronto, you're going to pay the same thing in Moosonee. Why? The shipping is the same as how they ship our groceries, and why shouldn't our groceries cost the same?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't we have the same quality that I can get down here for our families?
I hear you.
What's the answer?
Good.
Why is there no recognition of
Why
that?
is there no recognition? I'd like an answer.
You'd like an
I
answer
can jump
too?
into that, yeah.
Sure.
So one of the solutions to that, and we have offered this to the ministry, is that we have a funding formula that has been in place, developed by the ministry for the last 10 years. And it is a funding formula that is just based basically on volumes. And one of the things we've been calling for is a needs-based formula. You have to be able to identify the needs within communities. So if it is required that, in Irene's case, the needs of children needs to be looked at differently, that's what it should be. The ministry hasn't really moved on the funding formula. And so that is one of the pieces that we're looking at. But then that is because we're talking of the child welfare space. Before we even get there, why don't we have early intervention support for children so we all don't end up in a crisis space that we all find ourselves in? And those are some of the bigger investment front end, early intervention, prevention services we should be getting into.
You know, I don't know. I hesitate to read this statement from the ministry on the deaths that take place within the system, because I know you're all going to roll your eyes at the first line here, but I don't know.
One death is too many.
Well, there you go. Erwin,
Of
you
course.
read my mind. Here we go. Let's put this up. Sheldon, bottom of page 4. Here we go. The death of any child is a tragedy, and our thoughts are with the families, friends, and communities impacted. The ministry and the Office of the Chief Coroner have a joint directive that must be followed by children's aid societies in the event of a death. The process includes the requirement for all parties involved to review the circumstances surrounding the child's death, to take immediate action if required, and to identify larger opportunities for systemic change where appropriate. Making the child welfare system safer with increased accountability and oversight has been a key element in the ongoing work of the child welfare redesign, and we will continue that work.
Can I
Erwin,
jump
you
in?
believe?
Well, go to Kyrus
It's,
first.
Okay.
Let me jump
Kyrus,
into
go
that
ahead.
one. You know, I really cringe every time I hear the child welfare redesign. I just want to walk you through this over the last 20 years. You know, 20 years ago we had Child Welfare Commission. We had the Child Welfare Commission. That was followed by a residential review in 2006, a child welfare transformation in 2008, about half a dozen blueprints, frameworks, and strategies between 2008 and 2015. Followed by another residential services review that we talked about 10 years ago, followed then by what was briefly called the child welfare modernization and then changed to the child welfare redesign, and the outcome is a girl in the dumpster. So these processes, when a minister keeps talking about this tinkering with the system that is just a rejigging of the same variables.
So
it
if
is
that's not getting it
nonsense.
done, what
It is
do we
nonsense.
need to do then?
Two things. One, we need different people actually thinking about what is required for children to be well in our society. And different people means first and foremost children. Their voices need to be represented. Their voices are less represented now, and because the children who have come to the attention of child welfare are usually children with complex needs right now, they are even easier to push aside and to say, well, you know, they can't possibly have a voice. So that's one problem.
Can they really advocate on their own behalf?
They can advocate with adults for sure, but they can advocate on their own behalf. And in fact, I think the advocate office at the time just had done a session with young people with disabilities to advocate on their own behalf, and they were very effective.
Okay, second thing.
What we cannot do is to continue to have redesigns, modernization, strategies, and frameworks that are produced by the same people who are in the system. And I hate to say it, and this is not at all meant to be a criticism of child welfare professionals, but child welfare professionals are child welfare professionals. They are stuck in that system and have been for 130 years. They cannot come up with something better. They are bound by the constraints of the system that has shaped them. That's also a comment on the profession of social work as it manifests within the child welfare system, which is a constrained profession.
What is the status of the Child Advocate Office you used to head up?
Well, it's closed. It doesn't exist.
Right. Do we need it back?
Of course. Of course we do. I mean, that goes without saying. There's one group, maybe two now. The ombudsman might say no because he's got some skin in the game. The government will say no because it's one promise they don't want. The one thing they've done they don't want to go back on. But I haven't heard anybody say no. We shouldn't. We do need it. But I'm not going to say the Child Advocate Office there wouldn't be this crisis, and it is a crisis if we were around still. What I would say is Navia, who died invisibly, would have been visible. And the idea of children being visible, of children, your children, who so long, especially in the South, nobody has seen them or heard them here. They have a presence. And this catastrophe couldn't be going on. I just want to say what needs to be done. So, Solomon, you're talking about money, and I'm not here to get you more money. That's not my purpose. But do I think that we should stabilize the child welfare system? Absolutely. If that means more money, absolutely. If we take children at the center, then yes, Kiris is right about the placements that you have in trailers, in parking lots of your children's aid societies, in office spaces and Airbnbs. If that's what's best for them, children at the center will do it, but you have money for others. We should shore up all community services that touch families, whether clear the 50,000 people autism list, clear it. It doesn't matter right now how much money it costs because we're losing our families.
It would cost $6 billion. That's
well,
part of the issue.
I hear we spent money to put beer in the corner stores, and I hear we're building a highway underneath the 401, which is going to cost $110 billion.
Yeah, so it's priorities.
It's not just priorities. Let's deal with the catastrophe in front of us. But that's not the only thing. It's not about money, Premier. We need to build a child and family well-being system. Allow child protection to do its job. If we're going to keep them, do child protection.
Running out of time here.
Child and Family Wellbeing Center system that has been posited by the Representative for Children and Youth in British Columbia.
I want to hear from Solomon and then from Irene.
So you did talk about children that need a voice. Some of us here as leaders are the voices of those children. The children we are talking about are children that are vulnerable children. Some of them, even their parents who have been their advocates, have showed up at different organizations trying to get them the supports they need. They haven't been able to find those supports. So all of us jointly working this together is where we need to go. Because at this point, folks see it as a child welfare issue. It is a children's services system issue.
Yes.
And that is where we all need to pull together so that no child in this province should be dumped at the front door of a CES building because the system couldn't take care of them. That shouldn't be happening.
Irene.
It's really a time of all hands on deck. How are we going to do this together? Because we can't do it alone, and none of the service providers within our region can do it alone either. And you're right, Erwin, it needs to be child-focused, family-focused, and it's time for us to start working together and doing it on a needs-based system.
I mean, the name of the ministry starts with the word children. You would think it would be child-focused.
Well, there used to be one that was child-focused, didn't there? That was the first thing the government did when it came into power, was get rid of the Ministry of Children and Youth Services. The one ministry responsible for the well-being of children, gone.
Yes.
That's when redesign started.
Yeah.
That's redesign.
Yeah.
Okay. Friends, that's our time. I want to thank the four of you for coming into our program tonight. Mr. Director, thank you for the wide shot there. To thank four splendidly passionate voices on an issue that is of great importance to the province of Ontario. And onward. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
While there is some understanding of postpartum depression, research shows that just as many, if not more, women struggle with their mental health during pregnancy. 1 in 4 women will experience mental health problems in the prenatal period, but this is still widely misunderstood. Dawn Kingston examines that and more in her new book, Your Brain on Pregnancy, a guide to understanding and protecting your mental health during pregnancy and beyond. She's also an associate professor in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary, and she joins us on the line from Edmonton, Alberta. Hi, Dawn.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's so nice to connect. I've had 2 kids. My kids are preteens, 11 and 13. I've read a lot of pregnancy books, a lot of baby books, and I have to say that your book, in my view, is if not one of the most important books for women to read and their partners to read. Excellent. Thank you so much. What brought you to research the intersection of mental health and pregnancy?
Ma'am, it really started in my neonatal days as a neonatal nurse, understanding the risks of prematurity. And when I started to do graduate work, I really wanted to think about how can we prevent preterm birth, small babies being born. And I discovered a real link between stress and prematurity. And then as we researched it more, I realized it's not just stress, it's depression, anxiety, any form of mental health challenge in pregnancy. And it wasn't just prematurity. It was also children's development, emotional well-being, physical development. And so that really led us on a train of discovering what was prenatal mental health about. And then secondly, really understanding that we had a system that wasn't paying any attention to mental health in pregnancy. And that really started our advocacy journey as well.
I think there's this idea that when someone becomes pregnant, they are so happy, they're excited. And when you're pregnant, you are told that everything that you do, everything that you eat impacts the baby, that if you get stressed out, there's a lot of guilt about, I can't be stressed. And it's really hard to do over the period of 9 months, well, actually 10 months because it's 40 weeks. But you write that there is much more awareness around mental health problems after giving birth, like postpartum depression. So if you are experiencing anything during pregnancy, sometimes you blame yourself. So why has there been so little focus on mental health problems like during pregnancy when people are pregnant?
I think, ma'am, it's been an over focus, to be honest, that started on the postpartum period, which started really, I think, with postpartum psychosis. It was wonderful to bring awareness to postpartum psychosis, postpartum depression, and there were lots of media and stars that did that for us. But what it did is I think it overshadowed a little bit what happens in the prenatal period. And when we started really studying the data and looking at our own work, we realized that 3 out of 4 women who had postpartum depression had depression or anxiety in pregnancy. And so prenatal mental health problems are actually the biggest risk for postpartum mental health problems. And so it really to us showed a disparity in where the focus was. And so, again, while I think that postpartum depression awareness was a wonderful thing and very needed, I think we just need to now broaden our understanding of the perinatal period in total, pregnancy and postpartum.
I want to read a passage from your book. You write, women see healthcare providers during pregnancy more regularly than almost any other time in their lives. During prenatal visits, women undergo physical exams, ultrasounds, and laboratory tests that screen for physical conditions such as diabetes, high blood pressure, infection, and fetal anomalies. But these are far less common than mental health problems. Yet rarely are a few minutes devoted to asking simple screening questions that would identify the most common mental health problems in pregnancy. When you are pregnant, you are tested for diabetes, blood pressure, and you write that those conditions are actually less likely to happen than mental health problems. Why isn't depression tested?
It's a North American thing, ma'am. In the UK and Australia, they have had national screening programs during pregnancy and postpartum for well over a decade. They have good policies. They have a great healthcare system. They have trained their midwives, nurses, physicians to do screening. So there has been a call for screening in North America, in the US and Canada, but we haven't lifted it off the ground. And I think in some ways it's because there isn't a central way of doing that. And that's in part why we have put screening tools in the book and why we've put them also on our website, which has free resources, hopeformentalhealth.com. But we really, this is a North American blockage in some ways why we don't screen women. I think the other piece of it is there's this feeling by healthcare providers that this is awkward. It's a difficult conversation. Women don't want this, but actually our research shows that well over 98% of women want to be screened for emotional health. And then the other piece of it is, what do you do when you open Pandora's box and you discover that you have a patient who has a mental health challenge? Our North American system isn't all that well set up to address mental health problems in the perinatal period. Again, it's also why in our book we wanted to really focus on self-management, because actually it is the place most women want to start.
You mentioned Pandora's box, and I think a lot of, if you're pregnant, you're looking for this information. And if you don't find it, because we still live in a society that says that when you're pregnant, it's the best time of your life, you're supposed to be happy. But if you're feeling any kind of emotions opposite that, you internalize them. But, you know, what other gaps did you identify in the healthcare system in terms of mental health care during pregnancy?
Yeah, our team is going to phrase it. So women don't tell and providers don't ask. Again, if you have routine screening as part of a well woman's checkup, as part of one of the 13 prenatal visits, then you don't have to rely on a particular physician asking questions or a woman having to bring it up. Most women will not bring up mental health challenges. However, again, in our work, the vast majority of women have identified, if a provider asks me how I'm doing, I would tell them honestly.
You do say in the book that the most important thing to keep in mind is that if we don't acknowledge there is a mental health issue, that's the thing that's going to cause long-term damage. I want to talk to you more about that. But what are some of the factors that would make someone more likely to experience mental health problems during pregnancy?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked about those, Nam, because without those, women feel like this is a random thing. You know, postpartum depression, that's the impression we have. And I think it will carry on over into prenatal mental health problems if we're not really clear. The 4 biggest risk factors that lead a woman to have a mental health challenge at any point in her life: and not having enough social support, so not having friends that love and care and nurturing relationships, having high partner conflict. And we're not talking about a single argument. We're talking about a constant tension and fighting in a close relationship with a partner. Having high stress. You know, we've known that for 30 years, that high stress can cause challenges in unborn animals, unborn babies. And then finally, really having a previous mental health problem. And that's an important point, because we are starting to put a picture together in our research team that says it's not postpartum depression or anxiety, prenatal depression, anxiety. It really is about what's happening across a woman's life. So the book focuses in pregnancy, but the more we uncover this work, the more we see a long-term struggle as brain and nervous system dysregulation that probably started way before pregnancy and has existed across a woman's life.
There's a joke around when you're pregnant, you know, you're eating all the foods, you are going through the mood swings. But on the serious side, how can you tell a difference between someone who could just be experiencing mood swings versus something that's really serious mental health-wise during pregnancy?
Right. I think that's where the screening tools can really help, because then we're not having to guess. We just do a screening tool. It tells us if we score above a certain level, then, you know, we're struggling more than average. But in general, we're really concerned about women who, so if, let's use a situation, someone's cat dies, and sort of a situational thing, right? I feel kind of crummy, sad, grief, loss, angry, angst, but it doesn't last. Now, in the DSM, you know, our kind of our Bible of psychology, it would say 6 months, but that's a long time in pregnancy. In general, something that goes beyond a situation and lasts for a period of time is where we start to think this is just a little beyond normal, beyond, healthy normal.
I want to take a look at some of the statistics in the book regarding how women feel about reaching out to their healthcare providers for help. 70% are hesitant to talk to prenatal provider about their mental health. That's a big number. 44% worry about being put on antidepressants. 46% believe symptoms will just get better on their own. We seem to live during a time where we're having a lot of open discussions about a lot of different topics that might have been taboo 20, 30, 40 years ago, even 10 years ago. Why is it still so hard for us to talk about mental health challenges?
I think, Nan, because it speaks to the very heart of who we are as a person, to our identity, to our sense of competency, to our sense that we are a broken person. And that's where in the book we are really, and our team is really starting to focus on the idea about, isn't it just brain and nervous system dysregulation? We've been jarred. We've been jarred often by circumstances in our lives as children or as adults that we had no control over, but it affects how we see ourselves. And depression, anxiety, stress are symptoms that are kind of oozing out of those experiences that have become embedded in our nervous system. But if we can think about it like that and take it away from the fact that we are broken and wounded and, we're in trouble because of that, it's a very different look at what we're experiencing.
Maybe this is just my experience, but even just talking to some of my friends who've had kids, when you're pregnant, there's a lot of concern about the baby. There are rarely any questions asked about the mom. And even after you have the baby, as soon as the baby is born, it just kind of feels like, okay, here you go. And if you're a first-time mom, it's like, oh gosh, I have to keep this person alive for what did I do? Do you think there's a little bit of that societal expectation that you're supposed to know what to do, and maybe it makes it harder for women to talk about the difficulties they have with their mental health during pregnancy?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think many women who have not been nurtured as children, in a loving and nurturing home, also feel a bit unable to, or they've lost confidence about whether they'll be able to nurture and love their child as well. So I think that plays into it too. But I agree, and I think I'm going to bring in at this point, Nam, some of the research that's been done on Dan Siegel. Dr. Dan Siegel is a big proponent and researcher in the area of interpersonal biology. And it's the idea that we regulate each other. Partners regulate each other. Our nervous systems, we regulate each other. Mothers and children regulate each other. It's why we put babies on a mother's chest after birth, right? We know that it regulates their heart rate and breathing. But there is a bigger picture to this, which is it regulates emotions as well. And so that really speaks to me about the importance of mothers being emotionally healthy so that they can regulate the emotional well-being of their children as well.
I think one of the things that I found really helpful in your book is that once you identify it, the most important thing is to identify it, because then you can actually address what's happening. But if you don't do that, what are the risks if a mother is experiencing these mental health challenges while she's pregnant?
Yeah. The biggest risk is chronic depression, anxiety, or stress. That is not doing anything about it. And I'll go back to that statistic. 44% of women don't want to talk to their doctors because they fear going on antidepressants. And what most women, our research showed, most women don't understand that there are actually lots of ways of dealing with depression, anxiety, and stress that don't involve medication. And so the main issue with not identifying a challenge is, yes, not being able to take steps to do something about it. And then the dread that exists, right? When you don't know, there's a dread. But when you have the facts, then you're able to kind of draw a line in the sand and you can create a plan and you can go forward. And with mental health, it's just like in the book I talk about, it's just like diabetes. It's just about managing.
You know, you mentioned medication, and there is this kind of, I know when you're pregnant, you shouldn't be taking any medication at all, but sometimes medication is needed.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is. And I wouldn't say it's the first thing unless a person has left their symptoms so long that it really is needed to sort of begin the process of getting well. But most women really want to start with something else. They want to start with some kind of self-management, and that's completely reasonable. And then if that isn't helping, go forward and consider medications. And yes, sometimes medications are needed. Yeah.
In the book, you describe strategies that people can use to mitigate symptoms that, when they might be experiencing. How do you know when these strategies are enough versus when it's time to seek professional help?
I put together a bit of a list, sort of 5 items in the book that women can use, questions to ask about, is it time to get help? If you are using strategies and they are helping and your symptoms are lessening and you're feeling better and you're feeling confident about managing your own mental health, that's the place most women want to be in. But if those are not working, if you're feeling like I'm getting worn out from doing this on my own, if you feel that it would be helpful to have talk with someone who is compassionate, then it is time to get help. And it doesn't have to be an all in. You can try a couple of sessions with a professional, and if it's not helpful, you can turn around and go back.
We only have a few minutes left. I want to sneak in a couple more questions. We talked a little bit about stigma, but we kind of danced around a little bit around it. What would you say to mothers who don't want to talk about prenatal or postnatal mental illness because they worry others will question their competency as a parent?
I would go back and really have them focus on what is it that started this journey. A woman wasn't born broken. She's not broken. What has happened in her life that has led to this point where she is experiencing these symptoms? That they are symptoms. They are like a cold or a flu. They're like a fever. They tell us that something is going on inside that needs some attention. And so they are red flags and symptoms, much like a fever is a symptom of a virus. And so I would encourage women. I think it's partly education, being able to educate others and say, you know what, it's a symptom. It's not me. It's not that I'm broken.
What if they think that they've damaged their child?
Right. There was I love this. I'll just share this one study. I love it because it shows how neuroplasticity is the root of our brain health. Our brains change, our nervous systems change. And even if a woman had depression or anxiety or high stress in pregnancy, that does not mean that the baby's future is sealed and it's the baby's going to be in trouble going forward. I love this study. It showed that women who had depression, the women who held their babies after they were born, their brains basically healed. And so they measured the amount of time that women held their babies, and the women that held their babies more, babies' brains looked different. And so when we talk about those impermanent changes to the brain, that's what we're talking about. Then holding and nurturing the baby takes those epigenetic tags off. And I love that because it's such a story of hope that the simple things of nurturing a child can reverse these effects. Isn't that a good news story?
That's a great news story. I think it makes a lot of women feel much better. In a recent study published in Nature Neuroscience, scientists in California took MRI scans of one woman before she got pregnant until 2 years postpartum. They found that nearly every part of the brain was affected by pregnancy. This was a review of just one person. But will studies like this help others learn about the brain and pregnancy in the future?
Yes, and in fact, we just got a $100,000 grant, which is small probably by comparison for what this work requires to start looking at scans of multiple women. So we'll be doing that here in Alberta. And our goal really is to create a database of what women's brains looks like so that we can really start embracing and improving upon our brain-based treatments.
Dawn, it was really nice to connect with you. Thank you so much for spending time with us. I think this book is going to help so many. It answers questions that a lot of women want to ask, but maybe are too ashamed to ask. So thank you for that. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me on today.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. How is Ontario doing with French immersion? We'll look into that question tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Next week on the agenda.
As Murray Sinclair said, they're growing up to be who they were meant to be. We didn't have that opportunity to be who we were meant to be. Granny was sent away, my mom was sent away, and didn't have that parenting or the language and the culture, and so it's a rebuilding and repair job, in so many ways.
That's next week on the agenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.